Earlier this week, you were writing about the prospects of there being an off-ramp for President Trump. We've seen a lot of vacillation over the last, say, 72 hours from the White House when it comes to the tack that the administration is taking vis-a-vis this war. Your sense of where that off-ramp is and what access the U.S. has to it right now?
Well, it's hard to have an off-ramp when the people you were talking to are dead. We saw that at the beginning of the war, and we saw that with Larijani as well. There had been some back-channel conversations with him, and then he's gone. So that is challenging. Also, the level of incoherence that has come from the American president. If you're an Iranian leader watching, you've got to be thinking this feels like panic. It feels like urgency, and that the only lever that the Iranians have, which is the economic pain that is coming from keeping the Strait of Hormuz closed, is actually working. So, I mean, on the one hand, I see continued escalation from the United States and Israel. And on the other hand, I see the Iranians with little capacity to negotiate, a little faith in negotiations, and also at least some semblance of a belief that their own deterrence is starting to bear fruit.
And I want to ask you, I asked many people this question yesterday, and I'm not sure we ever really got the answer. Can you explain, giving the administration the benefit of the doubt, possibly, can you explain the policy behind this OFAC waiver for Iranian oil, most of which is likely going to be purchased or already purchased by China? On its face, it seems like the U.S. has just put money in Iran's pocket and given a strategic competitor a discount on energy. But there has to be another thing that I'm not thinking of.
I think that the United States is hitting Iran incredibly hard with its military capabilities, but the vulnerability is on the economic side. And on that side, the absolute short-term priority for Trump is get the price down, get more oil out under any circumstances possible. And clearly he believes that there is some marginal benefit to price that comes from getting more of that oil out. And not necessarily in the hands of the Chinese, but instead to countries that the Americans are more nominally aligned with. Now, keep in mind that Trump's long-term plan remains take the oil. It's Venezuela redux. So I guess what the Trump administration would say in response to your question is, yeah, in the near term, this in principle goes to the regime, but the regime is not going to be able to use that for very long. We're going to take Karg Island. We're going to have the oil. That's why you've got thousands of American troops that are heading their way to the region. I do understand that it is incoherent in the short term, and Secretary of Treasury Bessent was doing his damnedest to try to frame it in that several hundred-word tweet that he put out, and he wasn't really convincing anyone with market experience.
There's some analysis out this morning from Regional Energy Group that says that Gulf capitals are increasingly concerned that Washington could move to wind down the conflict before securing a durable resolution on maritime access, leaving Iran with de facto control over traffic through the strait. Do you think that's a legitimate concern and something that people need to start looking at?
Well, it's a legitimate concern, not just for the Gulf states. I mean, you know, at this point, the Americans do believe that you're going to see fewer ballistic missile strikes from Iran over the coming weeks. Now, they've said that before, and they've been overconfident, but there's been a lot of damage done. They don't it's hard for them. They can't build more ballistic missiles in this wartime environment, given the damage to their military infrastructure that primarily the Israelis have done. But drones are a different story. And that means that for the foreseeable future, and here we're talking months and months at a minimum, this Iranian regime, if they wish, are going to be capable of continuing to pose threats to anything that goes through the strait, and to ongoing production and capability of Gulf energy infrastructure. Yeah. So, yeah, the Gulf is concerned about that, and they don't want the United States to stop now having started the war until that is resolved in some way. And we're hearing that from the Saudis, hearing that from the Emiratis, hearing that from the Qataris, the Kuwaitis. I mean, all of these countries have economic models that don't function with this level of violence and threat in their backyard.
Ian, something I've valued about your writing for so many years is how you look at the shifts in multilateral alliances. And I'd love to kind of bring that experience to bear in the context of this conflict. You had the U.S. and Israel going this alone from the get-go, but now we've heard entreaties from both the President of the United States to other countries to help secure the Strait of Hormuz. Now we hear it from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu this morning. There has been assembled, I guess, this coalition of a willing of sorts, 22 countries who are going to help the U.S. in its efforts to keep that strait clear and open, or clear that strait and make it open. What is your sense of the state of these fragile alliances? Of course, we've heard the rhetoric from the Trump administration here over the last year plus toward its longstanding U.S. allies. How fractured are they, and sort of how more fractured are they as a result of this conflict?
They're very fractured. In fact, I mean, this idea of a rupture that my friend Mark Carney put out there during Davos is clearly the way that the Europeans feel as well, that there is no level of trust of the United States president and of what the Americans think of their allies and how they treat their allies going forward. But the Europeans desperately need the strait open. Trump is certainly right about that. And also the Americans are the dominant military force, not just for the Europeans, but in the world. So as much as they may mistrust the United States, they recognize that the U.S. remains very important for them. And I have seen a change in the diplomatic posture towards the United States from Europeans, from this not our war, we want no part of it, to we're not going to engage in the fighting, but we understand that we collectively have a problem now, irrespective of who started it, and we need to try to engage with you. We hear you, find a way to work together to eventually have the straits safe and passable. But I do not see Europeans, as of today, I don't see Europeans that would be willing to send forces to bring the strait open during this level of fighting. And I think, by the way, the United States is a minimum of 4 weeks, a minimum, best possible scenario where they would be able to actually bring escorts to start moving ships peacefully through the strait. So I don't think that's yet priced in to the markets, and it's certainly an ongoing problem where the Americans and the Israelis are going it alone.
And on that note, escorting ships through the strait is not the same thing as securing the strait and having it open to its normal capacity. It seems like this is something the U.S. cannot do alone. Trump has seemed to need to call in these allies. I was reading this morning, part of that is after the Cold War, the U.S. actually got rid of some of its minesweeping capabilities in the theory that if it were to need something like this, it would be part of a NATO operation. Can you talk to us just about the capability? Is this something the U.S. can do alone if it so chooses, or does it need those allies, which sometimes the president doesn't like to rely on?
I'm a political science expert, not a military analyst. So I'm not speaking in school if I answer that question directly.
Fair enough.
But what I can say is that in the White House and in CENTCOM, they are a lot less concerned about dealing with mines than they are dealing with drone strikes going forward. That has been the principal thing that has addled them, as well as the concern that what do you do if the Houthis suddenly get fully involved in this conflict. There is some evidence that the Houthis are already involved, that some of the drone strikes through the empty quarter in Saudi Arabia came from the Houthis in Yemen. It's hard to imagine any other geography that would have brought those strikes in that area. But that's muscle flexing. That's very different from hitting the pipeline, bringing 7 million barrels of Saudi crude to market, shutting down the Red Sea, that kind of thing. Also, the White House is very concerned about that.
Ian, very quickly here, we've got about a minute left. You raise an interesting point in your most recent note. You say the Iran war now feels a bit like the early days of the pandemic to you. I thought that was such a fascinating line. Explain that, if you would, what that indicates about sort of where this might be progressing going forward beyond 4 weeks' time.
It means that we all see that there's a problem and we're worried about it and it's dominating headlines, but we're not thinking about the second and third order implications that are going to affect all of us in the global economy for a much longer period of time, say for a year or more, and how this is going to rupture America's relations in the Gulf, about the future of Israel in the world as a consequence, about the future of asymmetric warfare and drones as a consequence. We're certainly not thinking enough about the longer term implications of this suspension of global supply chains in so much of the economy beyond oil, for example, fertilizer, the planting season, food as a consequence. Yeah. Plastics that come from hydrocarbons. I mean, every auto part imaginable. Sort of packaging for consumer durables. Yeah. I mean, this is going to take months before it really hits prices in the market. But when it hits, it's going to be with us for a long time. And every day that we aren't addressing the Strait is going to be a much longer period of time on the back end that we're all feeling that as consumers.